All right, today we're diving into an idea that completely flips the script on what most of us think about evolution and the connection between humans and apes. It's a really fascinating and, let's be honest, a very unconventional argument that all comes from a super specific reading of a sacred text. So, let's get right into it.
So right off the bat, you're hit with this massive question. It asks you to challenge one of the absolute cornerstones of modern biology. And this question, well, it's the doorway into the text we're breaking down today, which tells a radically different story about where we, and maybe some apes, come from.
And this is where it gets really wild. Here's the core idea in a nutshell. The argument is not that humans evolved from apes. Nope. It's the exact opposite. That certain types of apes are actually the descendants of a group of humans who were transformed by God as a punishment.
Okay, so you're probably wondering, how on earth do you even begin to argue against something like established science? Well, it starts by going right after the big guy, Charles Darwin himself. But the argument isn't about fossils or genetics. Instead, the author claims it was Darwin's personal motives that cooked up his whole theory.
Now, this is a pretty stunning claim the author makes. They argue that Darwin actually knew the real truth because, get this, his own cousins were supposedly part of this divine transformation into apes. So the idea here is that the theory of evolution wasn't some great scientific discovery. It was a lie, something Darwin invented out of pure anger and spite to cover up and flip his own family history on its head.
So where is all this coming from? I mean, what's the evidence for a claim this big? Well, the author doesn't turn to the fossil record or to DNA. The entire argument is built on scripture, specifically on a pretty well-known story from the Quran.
It all boils down to a few very specific verses. And the author isn't reading these as metaphors or allegories. Oh no. They're taking them as literal historical accounts of a physical, divine transformation.
This is the first piece of the puzzle the author presents. It says that God made from them apes and pigs. From the author's point of view, this isn't just figurative language for people acting like animals. It describes a literal, physical change. The next verse gets even more direct. It's a divine command aimed at a group called the Sabbath breakers because of their sins, and the punishment is spelled out right there. Be apes, despised. This sounds like a direct, on-the-spot transformation.
And this is a huge point for the author. That same exact command, be apes, despised, shows up again in a totally different chapter of the Quran. For this author, that's no coincidence. It's seen as powerful proof from the holy book itself that this event was absolutely real.
But wait a minute. This raises a really big question, right? And it's one the author sees coming. If this all happened thousands of years ago, how could those transformed apes have any descendants still alive today? Let's look at how the author deals with this.
Yeah, this could be a major hole in the whole argument. I mean, a lot of theological interpretations would say that any beings transformed like this would have been made sterile, that their line would have just ended right there with them. But the author, they argue strongly against that.
So the way the author gets around this is pretty interesting. It all comes down to how you interpret these competing prophetic traditions, which are known as hadith. The author basically throws out the common hadith that says the transformed couldn't have kids, claiming it was faked and inserted into the texts. Instead, they point to a different hadith, one about people being turned into mice who did have children, as the real, authentic proof that it's possible. So let's just break down the logic here from the author's perspective. First, the Quran talks about them being transformed but never says they were all wiped out. Second, the punishment was the transformation itself, not being made sterile. And this next one is key. For the curse to really have an impact, they needed to have children and see their own descendants born into that same despised form.
Okay, so if we follow this logic, if these descendants are still around, how in the world would you even know? How would you spot them? Well, the author actually provides a guide, laying out a whole set of traits they say can be used to tell the difference between original apes and these transformed apes.
Well, the author lays out this kind of checklist. They argue that original apes are what you'd expect. They have tails, they're strong, fast, and can take care of themselves. But the transformed ones, they're supposedly tailless, have feet that look more human, and are weak, clumsy, and slow. The author even claims that the fact that some apes need human protection in zoos or sanctuaries is proof of their cursed, despised state.
So as we get to the end here, it becomes really clear that this is about more than just some fringe theory on apes. What the author is doing is mounting a full-on challenge to what they see as a completely false scientific and historical record.
You see, for the author, this isn't some new, radical idea.
It's the original truth, a truth they believe was deliberately buried. The whole point of their argument is to correct the record and to blow the whistle on what they see as a misinformation campaign created specifically to prop up Darwin's so-called lie.
And then, the author basically throws down the gauntlet. They issue a direct challenge to anyone who disagrees, but, and this is a big but, they have to play by their rules. Any counter-argument can't come from science or fossils, it has to come from the same place they did, conclusive evidence from the Quran and prophetic traditions.
And it really leaves us with this one big thought-provoking question at the end of it all. This whole argument is built on a very specific way of seeing evidence and defining truth. It kind of forces you to think about how different ways of knowing, whether it's science or theology, are built and defended, and ultimately, how we all decide which stories we use to make sense of the world around us.